Well, good evening and welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions. I'm in our newer church building here. It's new to us, but it's been around for a while, and it's undergoing construction. So this is your first view into what will be our church building. But there's a reason why I'm here tonight, because, this building was left vacant for about 7 years. And it is really amazing how a building can fall into such disrepair. Now, it doesn't look bad, at least I hope it doesn't to you, but you should have seen it before when the roof was leaking and the ceiling tiles were coming down, you might imagine. But even now you can see the kind of construction and things sitting around and all that's happening here. Well, that relates to our story tonight from the last part of the book of Judges, chapter 17 through 21. These are two disturbing, difficult stories about the life of Israel at this time of the Judges. They probably occurred early on, but the writer of Judges put them at the end because there's a certain theme that runs through them, but also sort of as a summary of the trials of the people. The first story is about idolatry. We have a man from the tribe of Ephraim and his mother, and they had gold, they had silver, and he turned it into an idol, and then had his own priest and was worshiping it in the town in which he lived. And then a Levite comes looking for work. As you may remember, the Levites were to be scattered throughout the land of Israel to teach the people God's ways and God's laws. But if society's breaking down, they don't tend to take care of those religious people, do they? If they make their living off of their teaching and ministry of the word. And so he was out of work, and so he agreed to be the priest for this household and this idol. Well, then the tribe of Dan, who had been pressured from the west, from the Philistines, in the southern part of the country, near the tribe of Judah, began looking for an easier place to settle. And on their way north, they passed through the territory of Ephraim and found this home and this idol and all, and the Levite. And what ended up happening was, by force, they took the Levite and the idol, and they went off to their territory, what became Dan. And they set it up there. And we're told that, that idolatry continued clear until the land was given into captivity. Now, some wonder whether that really refers to when Assyria took the land, but we do remember that Dan, to the north, the city of Dan, in that territory, became one of the idol places that was set up when Israel separated between the tribes of the north and Judah to the south. So, there it is. Maybe that was the beginning of that whole scenario. But that's the first story. The second story is even more disturbing. Here's God's people and a Levite with a concubine. Now, you might want to think about that. With a concubine, spends a night in a Benjamin town called Gibeah. And, the people of Gibeah act like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they want to defile the Levites. So he gives them his concubine, and they defile her instead. Now, this is really difficult, right? And they kill her in the process. And so he cuts the woman up, the woman's body all up, and sends it to the tribes and wants justice for this terrible thing that's happened. And so all of Israel gathers together against this city, and they ask Benjamin what's going on. That was the tribe in which the city was contained in. And the Benjaminites want to defend their brothers in Gibeah, and it turns into almost a civil war. And after some successive failures, because God is dealing with them, that is, Israel as a whole and their whole sin, finally, most of the tribe of Benjamin is wiped out. And then there's this sort of a sordid affair of how they get wives for the remaining men of the tribe of Benjamin. And then the book kind of ends. Those are the stories. What's the thread? Well, if you heard, both instances contain in relationship to a Levite. A Levite who had lost his way and was no longer serving God as he should. The first was idolatry, which is a violation of the first table of the law, not having other gods and making other idols. The second story was a violation of the second part of the law, loving your neighbor, right? And in this case, it was adultery and fornication and all those things that go with it. And in each case, there was a Levite. And the second Levite had a concubine. He had a mistress. Well, pastors unfortunately falling into sin and priests falling into sin is nothing new, unfortunately, for God's people. And here we see how sin continues along. The deterioration that happened was quick as the people of Israel were living in the land. And it gives us a question, where's the hope? And in both stories, we have this little summary statement. And there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right according to his own eyes. It's kind of a summary of what was going on in Judges. Well, when we do things that are right according to our eyes and not God's eyes, when we give into situational ethics, when we become relative and we're like our neighbors, you see we fall into grievous sin. And the Levites that were supposed to teach God's ways to the people had fallen into such sin that they now had become a stumbling block. They were not helping God's people, but actually hurting them. All this points us to the need for a true priest, a true teacher of God's word, who would come and be faithful in all things. Well, that person is Jesus Christ. And you may remember that in the history of Judges, it was the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, who was at work. And I think he was at work in these situations, judging Israel and stirring up a desire in them for a king, to be sure, a king and a priest, right, who would be faithful to the uttermost, who would be the true king, the true priest of God's people. Well, that person is Jesus the Christ, who has come. And so while sin remains, Christ has beaten it, and we can have redemption from it. And even in the midst of difficulties, we can have great hope in Jesus Christ. Well, that's good news. Good night.